Recently, my friend was discussing teachability with me and how it's necessary to grow, and how it takes some humility to allow yourself to be corrected and taught properly. And the more that I thought about it, the more I realized that teachability isn't just a personality trait, but rather a spiritual trait. So, what does the Bible actually say about being teachable? The very first thing that comes to mind when you look at teachability is humility. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1 says, "Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid." Jeez, that feels very blunt, doesn't it? However, Solomon doesn't just say that correction is helpful, but that one's willingness to receive it is evidence of a love for wisdom. Rejecting correction isn't just refusing advice, but rejecting one of the primary ways that God helps us to grow. I know people typically don't enjoy being told they're wrong, but many times our first reaction is to defend ourselves. However, being a teachable person and having a teachable heart means that we ask, what can I learn, instead of how can I prove I'm right? In my own life, I recognize how criticism of my work can really mess with my perspective and ego, but I also recognize the value in it, of how it points me towards growth. I hold myself to high standards and can be quick to overthink criticism of my ways and thoughts, as I tend to give my all and do my best before I let something be viewed by others, or to let others look at it and really dissect it. However, I'm also not fully satisfied by being told everything I'm doing is good, as I always want to take a next step forward and to grow in whatever skills I'm using. So that's something that I'm still learning, that growth doesn't happen when my pride is protected, but when I'm humble enough to learn. And so teachability begins with humility, but humility also naturally leads us to recognize that God doesn't only teach through his word directly, but also through the people he places in our lives. So Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17 says, "Obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls, as those who must give account. Let them do so with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you." This verse specifically speaks about submitting to our spiritual leaders because they watch over our souls. However, if we look at it broadly, we also see that throughout Scripture that God often teaches us through the people he places in our lives. That includes our parents, mentors, teachers, and our other Christian friends, and even other friends who might not be of the faith. He can use them to teach us as well. God doesn't also just teach us through our personal Bible reading. He uses the people around us for his glory and for our growth. His word is our ultimate authority, but he can use people to help us understand and to apply lessons. And being teachable means recognizing that God often works through the people he's placed in our lives. Of course, it's not an excuse for not reading Scripture, as whatever lessons you may learn through others should be taken back to Scripture and compared to it. Sometimes when I'm at church, I know I can close myself off because we may be learning things that I already know, or I know it won't really apply to me and where I'm at in my life. However, I recognize that God's calling me to humble myself more and more, and to have an open heart towards the things other people have to say. That God isn't limited to teaching us only through the people we consider more mature than ourselves, but also regardless of where we might be in our walk, we can still learn daily from him. God can teach lessons through anyone around me, be it a formal setting or not. All it takes is a humble heart that's willing to receive whatever and whenever he wants to teach us. So regardless of our place in our walk with God, we can still learn from him, leading to the idea that teachable people keep growing. Proverbs 9, verse 9 says, "Give instruction to a wise man, and he will still be wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning." A wise person doesn't know everything, and it takes wisdom to know that. Instead, a wise person is someone who is still willing to learn. And so the difference between a wise and a foolish man isn't that one never makes mistakes, but that one keeps learning from them. To be teachable is you have to be willing to look at your mistakes and learn from them. You have to live each day wanting to grow closer and closer to God and actually live faith out like you are. You must want to be taught and corrected. You must be willing to learn carefully and listen carefully to others and humbly consider what you learn from them. Be willing to learn, and you will learn continually. A teachable heart never graduates or finishes growing. As I'm in that point in my life where I'm graduating high school, I know I'm going to continue learning beyond high school. I'm not going to stop learning altogether. No, I'm going to continue learning and continuing growing. So as long as we follow Christ, there will always be more to learn and more ways to grow and more opportunities to become like him. Finally, teachability reflects God's wisdom. The wisdom is described in James chapter 3, verse 17, saying that the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Heavenly wisdom is open to reason or willing to yield. That doesn't mean compromising God's truth, but having a humble heart means to be marked with these qualities, to be teachable. If God's wisdom produces a heart that's open to reason, then stubbornness and pride aren't marks of spiritual maturity. Humility is. Being teachable and humble is a reflection of God's wisdom. The more we grow in God's wisdom, the more teachable we become. The more teachable we are, the more room we give God to continue shaping us into the image of Christ. And so before we finish, I want to read Proverbs chapter 15, verses 31 and 32, which leave us with a final challenge. The ear that hears the rebukes of life will abide among the wise. He who disdains instruction despises his own soul, but he who heeds rebuke gets understanding. The book of Proverbs does not measure wisdom by how much you know, but how much you are willing to keep learning. This means the question isn't whether we've arrived spiritually, but whether we're still willing to be taught. Would you rather be the ear that hears the rebukes, the criticisms, and the growth challenges of life, and to abide among the wise, or you disdain the instruction, or will you heed the rebuke? So I have a few questions that I want you to think about that I've also been thinking about. So I want you to pray to God over them, and if God gives you answers, or whatever the answers that you feel he's placed on your heart, that you humbly accept them, that you humbly lower yourself into a place where you can truly answer these questions. Do I become defensive when someone corrects me? Do I only listen to people who already agree with me? Am I willing to change my mind when scripture shows I'm wrong? Am I praying for God to teach me, or am I assuming I've already learned enough? When was the last time someone corrected me and I genuinely never thanked them? So teachability doesn't mean believing everything that you're ever told, or never asking questions, but having the humility to recognize that God is still teaching you. He teaches us through his word, through his people, through correction, and even through our mistakes. So the most mature Christians aren't the ones who think they've arrived, but the ones who never stop learning from God. Every day is another opportunity to become more like Christ. If we're willing to come before him with a humble and teachable heart, may we never stop being students of the one who has all wisdom. Thank you so much for listening, and I pray and hope that you continue to be teachable, and I pray that I stay teachable as well. Thank you.